Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Josh and Geordie show, where we try to emulate the real life experience of sitting next to those two old guys in the balcony in the Muppet Theater. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, I love the Muppets. Yeah, they're so grumpy and funny. Yeah, it's great. I don't remember
Exactly.
their names, but I remember them.
It's like Stadler and somebody else, but you know, that's kind of what we're like, right? Sitting up here talking.
Yeah, we're exactly like that. It's the same thing, exactly. No. Yeah, no, great. I'm glad we're getting back together to talk. And I think today we're gonna try to talk about I know some might say more serious topic than talking about our 80s music and 90s music and television shows and all that. But I think we're gonna talk about what we probably love the most in life professionally, which is teaching. So I don't know, Jody, I'll start off just sort of like laying down the foundation, but you and I have been teaching at the same college for a long time, and
Yeah, how
we
long
just
have you been there?
2009 I was
Oh,
hired.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, 2000 January 2008.
okay. And so it wasn't until this year where we're like, oh, hey, let's talk, So we started talking, and so we have a lot of similar sort of circumstances. You were an adjunct for a number of years. I'm still an adjunct, and you and I kind of understand that role, that life of being an adjunct instructor. But I hate that word, that definition, because when you're an adjunct, it really doesn't mean anything other than um,
You're adjacent too.
yeah,
Yeah.
benefits, and there's some things that personally, but like when you're in the classroom, you're their teacher, and they don't care, they don't know, they're not, they don't. They all think we have a million parking spaces, and of course today we do because there's no one on campus anymore. But um, Jordy,
Well, and if I don't know if you noticed, but I never say the word adjunct. I always say part-time.
yeah,
And it's because of that. It's because your students don't have any idea that you're part-time or full-time. They don't know the difference between those two.
yeah.
And the grade that you put on their transcript is the grade on their transcript. It doesn't make any difference what your position is at the college. It's a grade that's going to follow them possibly for the rest of their life. So your importance as their instructor is the same no matter what your position or your permanent status at the college is. And that's really important because when I was a student, for example, I didn't know the difference between part-time and full-time, and I couldn't have cared less. But as being both a part-timer and a full-timer, I've come to understand what it means, and it's highly demoralizing sometimes, and it's might be freeing as well. So there's ins and outs to part-time versus full-time. But I think the biggest thing is that the colleges, and this isn't just a city college thing, the colleges around the country are balancing their books basically on the people like you and me who just want to teach and love to teach. And if we're going to make a fraction of what a full-timer makes, they're banking on the fact that we're better people than they are.
Yeah,
They, meaning the people who are trying to balance the budget of the college. It's not our college in particular, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, and I've taught anywhere from 3 to 16 units in a year, or semester. And I want to talk to you about that, about teaching and why you do it, and the love for it. You did it so long as a part timer. You taught at other campuses. What is it about being a teacher that appeals to you? It's not the money, it's not the fame and glory. It's something else, right? So can you talk about why you love it so much?
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that too and see why you love it as well. But for me, teaching is a calling, and I think that teaching, like among other professions, the people who do it really well and put their best effort to it are called to it. And I was called to it at 15 for better or worse. That's when I took my first city college class, and I was not a dedicated student before that. I, had no hope in my life. So the idea of going to school or getting anything out of school, I mean, I didn't understand school before that. I didn't, you know, my ability to learn things in a traditional classroom was very low. So my first community college experience, I took a class, and a history class, and it was just so amazing. And I watched the professor, Curtis Solberg, and watched him just paint this very clear picture of how people's behavior over time impacted what happened in the past and continues to impact us. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that person. And so I'm not sure if it was a calling because it was the first time in my life where being in a classroom made sense, or if I just saw it and thought, like, I can do that and I could do it pretty well, I think. But after that, going to school and everything I did was to get back to a community college. I wanted to teach specifically at a community college. And I've said this on your, when you first interviewed me, before we were doing the Josh and Geordie show, when it was just Josh interviewing Geordie, that community college is very special. It's truly what is the best about the US. It allows for anybody to get a higher education, no matter what their background is. And in that, everybody is benefited. We see a lot of wasted talent because people just can't get access to education, can't get access to a career that could actually benefit not just them, but everybody. So that's why I wanted to become a teacher. I felt a calling, and being a teacher I just can't even imagine doing anything else. I mean, maybe a park ranger. Like, I'd like to be a park ranger, but that's
with Yogi and Boo Boo.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just another type of teaching. Like, I would just be walking around telling people about plants and where to find bears or avoid them, depending on
and pick up your trash.
Yeah. So, and I was librarian before I was a teacher. And again, that's another type of education. So yeah, for me, one thing that was really clear during the pandemic and then during the mask wearing, which we're only like 2 weeks out of wearing masks and knock on wood, was that when I'm teaching, when I'm lecturing, I completely forget about anything else in the world. And I just am able to, and that's not true at any other time in my life. I can just focus on being in the classroom. And what's great is that independently, I don't tell students that like I completely forget what's going on in the world around me, and I'm just 100% focused in that classroom. But what's great is when I have students independently tell me that they feel the same way, that they forget about what's going on in the world and they're focused on the classroom. So during the pandemic, that wasn't so true, but yeah, so teaching for me is wonderful. I love it. I love helping students like me who didn't maybe always feel like they understood the classroom. I love helping them understand. I love, it's like that Bob Marley quote, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. That's what we're doing in there. We're ironically gaining a formal education and learning to question the system that raised us and indoctrinated us
within the system. Yeah.
So teaching I love, but bureaucracy and some other things I don't love so much.
Yeah, it's a really amazing profession, because it's totally true. Like, I could be having a million things on my mind, but as soon as you walk into that classroom, it's like this just breaks on your back, and it's just like you're free. And for the 80 minutes or longer, if you've got a couple back-to-back classes or whatever, it feels just so liberating. It feels as though nothing else matters other than you're here to serve, you're here to help. And that's a feeling that is very hard to replicate in any setting professional or personal. It's like this is a very unique thing to this experience. It's funny because last week I got I, there's a certain kind of compliment, and I'm sure you get it too, and like that's a real, like, because there's things people say and you're like, it'd be nice, and there's other things they say that are like, that is true. And so I had this is the first time I had this compliment in whatever 12, 13 years. Was these They were in groups, and these two students, they're pairs, and they're talking, and they're kind of done with their part, so I'm walking around just like checking in, and she says, do you have a PhD? And my first reaction was, oh no, like this is going to be like embarrassing, or they're going to judge me, like, so like, nope, don't have a PhD. And she says, I knew it. And so I'm like, oh my God, she's judging me. Like she can, she thinks I'm a terrible teacher. She's like, because you're a really good teacher. And what I found was that teachers with PhDs
Are not.
are not good teachers. Like she literally said that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you don't, because I love this class. And so that I never had that one before. Like that was a total new one. And I sort of felt sort of relieved, because I was thinking like, and this is that. And so I went into my whole thing like, well, in terms of what I teach, what's really valued is education, yes, but also real world experience, and to be able to talk about what you do so these students can go out and do the same thing or do different things, but just understand that base. And so that made me feel as though I was being effective. And me, like one of the ways that I teach, like you're not going to find anyone on this planet who's taken my class who's going to say that he's genius, that he's the smartest teacher I've ever had. Like they're never going to say that, but they will say that he's the best teacher I ever had, because he really allows us to be us. And that's a unique skill, because there are some teachers who just teach, it doesn't matter who's out there. They're going to teach the same every time. And I think this is where, when we talk about inclusion and diversity and equity, this is really what it means to me, which is students have to feel as though their teacher is relating to them in a unique way. Even if you have 30 students in a class, or maybe you probably have larger classes than I do, writing, they're capped lower, and they have to feel like they can see themselves in you. And whenever I teach, like I can see myself in many of these students. They're the students who were ignored and neglected, and never were given a little extra push, never were told you can do this. And you can tell who those students are, but for whatever reason, the miracle of whatever deity you want to believe in, they found this classroom and they are there. And this is your moment to help them or disappoint them again. And that's what I really enjoy, is being able to say, hey, I know you never talk, and I send the back every time, but I know you're listening. I know you're paying attention. I can tell, and making them feel included. I've also had this compliment of, you're the first teacher I ever had that made me feel as though I could raise my hand and talk. Like that's a real compliment. That's not like you're a good teacher. And so knowing that you're having an impact on these individuals who have been mistreated by the public education system forever, neglected, is really, really, really powerful. And that's what I enjoy about it, to be able to make somebody feel like they can believe in themselves in ways that they never thought they could before. And also, I'm teaching them how to do something I know really well. So I'm also teaching them the substance, and they can see it right away. Like journalism is one of these things where, like I tell them all the time, what you learn here and what you're going to learn in the next few years and what you go do, it's the same thing they're doing at the New York Times and the Washington Post. It isn't as though you go somewhere and then you learn a whole new way to do it. These principles and fundamentals are the same. So if you learn how to be a good reporter, an interviewer and writer now, like, that's the same throughout your life. Of course, you get better and there's more people, and the importance of the topics grow in terms of what you're reporting if you're in a big market. But it's the same, and they really like being able to see that. And so that's what I like about it, is I always sort of feel like there's some student who's just like me in this room who I can have a major impact on. And we also know that we can't do that with every student, right? I've had students drop class or get a bad grade, and then they come back later and they're ready 2 years later. They weren't ready before. And then I'm better now. I'm different in terms. So I like that. And I think also as teachers, we're constantly like going to school too. Like we're constantly learning. We're constantly learning, how do I be better? How do I be different? How do I refine? And we're learning from our students. So I think you and I have that in common. I think that's probably why we sort of, have connection. And I think it's what makes us good teachers, is that we know what it's like to be on the other end of that. And we're constantly trying to break that cycle,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think with, with you and I, we teach different subjects, obviously, but key to being a good teacher is teaching something that you love. And I would think that whoever is teaching out there, they studied the thing that they loved, so that's what they're going to teach. So I would hope that everybody is teaching the thing that they love. But for me, teaching geography is, like, I love geography so much, and I don't necessarily want to turn everybody into a geographer, but I do want them to see the value and the importance of something that is undertaught, something that isn't part of our normal people. So many people come into my classroom and think that they're going to learn places on a map. I don't know if this is true for other instructors in different fields, but I can't tell you how many people have told me what geography is. And so I'll be teaching and they'll be like, no, this isn't geography. You're supposed to be teaching this other thing. And I'm like, no, I think I know what geography is, and I'm sure I'm teaching the right thing. But because it's not really a part of our formal education before that, it's geography was kind of split up between history, earth science, and social science in our formal education. It's a whole long story. It has to do with the Nazis and imperialism. But for a long time, like, geography was kind of like divided. And so I get a lot of students who don't know what the subject is. And I love teaching them what the subject is, because even if they don't become geographers or don't find, because again, I think like teaching geography is a calling. You either have it or you don't. It's like singing. It's like you can go to all kinds of vocal lessons, but you either got it or you don't got it. So some people come into my classroom and realize like, oh, this is what I've been searching for, which is exactly what the revelation I had when I became a geographer, when I started studying geography. It was something I didn't know that it existed. And when I found it, I realized like, oh, this is exactly what I had been looking for. I wanted to be a teacher, but I wanted to teach about human behavior, but I also wanted to teach about the environment, because even back then in the 90s, it was like the environment was a big pressing issue, and more so now, and we haven't done nearly as much to help ourselves in the biosphere. But again, that's another story. But so I wanted to teach both those things, and I thought I had to choose between them. But when I found geography, I realized like, oh, wait, I can teach about the environment, and I can teach about human behavior and how human behavior is impacted by the environment, and humans impact the environment. Anyway, so when you teach something that you love, I think that you're a better teacher anyway. I'm not sure that I would be the same teacher if I was teaching accounting or I don't know, something else. Because I just don't have the same passion for it. So for you as a journalist, because you've been a journalist, because it's something that you enjoy and you have a calling to be, I would assume that you were a much better teacher because of that. Whereas it's hard to get excited about something that you don't necessarily feel strongly passionate towards. And so students feel that, they feel that passion that you have in the classroom, and they respond to it because energy responds to energy. Game recognizes game. And our students can feel when you're excited about something, and they get excited about it too, and it makes them feel more included. But yeah, the seeing students and feeling like you identify with them and feeling them, for me, I want them to see themselves in me in some way or another, which is why I'm brutally honest about who I am. That's one thing that I didn't really find with professors when I was in school, is they didn't really tell you who they were. And so I had this idea, I wanted to be a professor, but I had such a jaded, terrible past. And I didn't imagine that any of these people had that. I imagined that they all had been in a very nice family from a very young age, that they'd always been good students, that they went home and read all the time. And so I know that as a student, I idolized these people and thought that I could never really be like them because they don't have the same background as me. But then when I went to graduate school, and then as I got to know other professors, I realized, oh, yeah, they do. They have all kinds of backgrounds. And why aren't they telling their students this? Why aren't they telling them? I mean, maybe you want to have boundaries, obviously. You don't want to show like all your vulnerabilities, but show a little bit. Tell students that you got to see, in something. Tell students that you had a period of disillusion, and you left school and followed the harvest, which is what one of our students is doing right now.
We still love him.
Well, of course, Jacob Todd Frank, when you're ready to come back to school, please do, when you finish following the harvest. But but have those periods, like, be honest with your students, with who you are. And I think a lot of people think, oh, if they see my vulnerabilities, then they won't actually have faith that I can teach them. But I can tell you it's the opposite, that showing them your vulnerabilities gives them something to identify with, but also it helps them trust you. And what I've learned as a teacher is that if you don't have the trust of your students, if you're trying to teach them whatever you're trying to teach them, controversial topics that challenge them in some way, if they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. So gaining their trust in the classroom, and sometimes that's showing your vulnerability. Sometimes it's saying like, oh, oops, I don't, I'm like writing something on the board. My writing is terrible. It's absolutely illegible. Like I should have been a doctor. But I'll write stuff and I won't know how to spell it. And I'll say like, is there an E here? And students would be like, E, there's an E, but like, but showing them stuff like that like you don't write very well and you don't know how to spell. And for some reason, whenever you're drawing something on the board, it ends up looking like a big phallus instead of like what it's supposed to look like. And and you're not sure why whatever you draw ends up very phallic, but yeah. So I would say that identifying yourself in students and allowing them to identify themselves in you, and gaining trust and having passion in your subject, all of that makes you a good teacher. That brings students in, because the idea is you're trying to inspire them to learn. You're not the one with all the answers. You're the one who's showing them how to analyze the information and hopefully figure out the answers on their own.
And let's be real, there are some teachers, some students are brilliant. They're so smart, and they really force us to be on our best too. And it's so encouraging when you have these students, and you're like, whoa, you're going to just be amazing, or like a Jacob Todd Frank, who is brilliant, but quiet, and you sort of have to figure out, like, how do I get him to see himself the way you and I clearly see him, because we've had so many different students, and that's a challenge. You're going to hate this question, but do you have like a worst day, best day in the classroom kind of story? When you think back about how far you've come and where you started, do you have anything like that, or you're like, oh man, that was a day?
No, no, I don't think so. Like oh, well, I mean, I've had like situations. I teach topics that can be very controversial, and I have people who have emotional responses to them.
Mhm.
And I had, you know, um, this one student like standing over another student yelling at her once. Like he got up and he was like former military and was had some emotional PTSD something, and she said something like in class, and it was just a offhanded remark about something that she felt comfortable saying in class, because that's what I try to do, is make students feel comfortable saying whatever they're going to say, because we're in a learning environment, and the idea is that you're learning, not constantly checking yourself. So she said something that, and this guy just snapped and he stood over her and he was yelling like, "How dare you?" And I was like, "Oh my God, security." Like, I don't know what to do.
Eric, where are you?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And she was so amazing. Her name's, well, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying the other student's name. Her name's Danny, and she's in Miami now. And she was amazing. She's just like, I said what I said, you know, like, prove me wrong. And so I had to kind of, I tried to calm him down. And my biggest thing was like, step away from the young woman, like, don't stand over her. And then he left. And then, you know, you have to get student services involved and stuff like that. And everything was fine. He came back to class eventually and he finished the class and everything. But there was that. And after he left, there was like 20 minutes left of class, and I was giving them a midterm the next day, so I had to get through like this information, but I could not, like, I'd lost the class, obviously, you know, like that they were not going to listen to any more information that day, um because some giant former military guy had just stood over this young petite uh Latina and yelled at her, and there was just no coming back from that. So I had to let them leave. But anyway, there's been stuff like that that's happened. Um, yeah. And I've had also where, like, I had this guy just like wander into one of my summer session classes once. He wasn't in the class and he wandered in, and I was like, all right, he wants to sit there. That's okay.
Mhm.
But afterwards, he like backed me into a corner, and there were all these rocks because geography. And so I like picked one up and like had to tell him to get out of the classroom. Um, and then I called security and talked to security and everything. And the next day they're like, okay, we'll be around your classroom and yada 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 in case he comes back. But the next day I told my students, I was like, did you see that guy just wander in? Did you all feel comfortable just leaving me alone with him? Because here's what happened afterwards. Um, and they're like, oh my goodness, right? And then the guy came back. And when he came back, you know, I'd been told by security, like, if you see him, call security immediately. And so it was like 5 minutes left of class, and he came back, and I was like, okay, everybody, we're going to wrap this up. I got to, you know, they knew I had already told them, like, if I see him, I have to call security. So I went to call, and I was like, you guys can leave. Don't worry. None of them left. Like, every one of my students stayed. They were like, we're not going to leave. We left you yesterday. And so
That's
that
great.
was, yeah, that was a very sweet moment for me, that like not one of the students left. They all decided to wait, because they didn't want to leave me alone with this dude.
Yeah, well, you know, going to your first point, how cool is it to be able to facilitate good conversations in the classroom where you as the teacher, you just like step back and you watch them learning from each other. And often those conversations erupt over some disagreement, some conflict where they're just like, no, that's not how it is. Let me tell you how it is. And then you as the teacher have to make them somehow both feel safe to express their ideas without judgment, and that's the only way. And then when it works perfectly, when they're done, they're like friends, or they like agree that they, oh, I learned something. And that's a very unique skill to be able to have, where you're not taking sides with anyone. I mean, even if you know somebody's like, that's so wrong,
Mm-hmm.
still them filling the space to be able to express it. Like when technology fails, like when I was first starting out, I would just dread, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get the projector to be in sync with my computer here? And what's going to happen? Or audio. Like when I remember when I was first starting out and I'm at the bunker, I didn't know what all those controls were. And like, why is there no audio? And then I went like a whole class, like, I guess we're not going to have audio. And then as soon as everyone left, I kind of stuck around like, oh, all I had to do was press this button and it flips. But there's not a whole lot of like training that goes with that. It's just like, here's your stuff and figure it out. So those technology failed days early on were always very stressful. And I used to always make sure I had a ton of markers in the class. And before we stopped doing everything through paper, do I have enough copies for class that I can hand out, and quizzes and scantrons, and just do I have backup, like just that over preparedness feeling that you have as a young teacher. And then you start to get more comfortable and realize, it's gonna be fine. If technology fails, you can have a creative day where you're just talking, and I've also learned that too, is you can over prepare, you can over plan, and sometimes the students just want to hear your stories that day. Doesn't need to be synced with a PowerPoint or a Google Slides. It's okay, So those are like my worst days. Are those? How do you deal with that line between teaching and being firm and stern and having expectations with coddling? But how do you maintain your trust with your students when you have to be like, no, versus I need sensitivity here to this person's situation?
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I thought of another best day ever story that I'll say in a minute. But I don't know, it's hard to say like where I say no versus coddling, because there's understanding and there's coddling. And I would say that I knew this instructor. I saw their study guide for an exam, and basically they had written out everything and just let blank spaces that their students had to fill in as their study guide. And I just thought, like, what? This is coddling. This is and the instructor even said, like, oh, I spoil them. And I was like, this. So I try to keep in mind, you have the beauty of working in a community college is you have this diverse set of students, and some of them are 15, some of them are 80, some of them have no formal background in school, some of them have a ton, they went to amazing schools, they went to private whatever, and some of them have kids at home, they're working 2-3 jobs, they're living with roommates, there's like 52 people sharing a closet, and somebody, like 2 people sleep in the bathtub. How can you even study in that? How can you get the space and time that you need to sleep and to recharge? So I try to keep in mind that when I have students who come to me and they're like, I have this, and this, what is my goal? So I think that a lot of people get stuck on the idea of what's fair, and that term, just drives me nuts. It's what's fair is that your students get what they need, and they have different needs. And again, I know I can hear people thinking like, well, how am I supposed to know what all their needs are? Well, in the past, and often instructors still err on the side of, I'm just going to assume everybody's lying to me, so they're all going to have the same, like, if you don't turn it in by this due date, then forget about it, no matter what. But I err on the side of, okay, there's going to be 2 people who are slackers out of the 10 who are asking me for an extension. And yeah, 2 people might be slackers, but the other 8 are dealing with real issues. And if my goal is to be a teacher and to make sure that is to put information and analysis and understanding ahead of bureaucracy, like due dates and et cetera, then I need to keep that in mind. What is the goal? The goal is not that they finish something on this arbitrary date, but that they understand it and they finish it. So last week, for example, I gave midterms, and I had one student, and I mean, the student was going out of his mind. Like, he had a botany exam, he had a quiz, he was so stressed out. So I was like, why don't you just take my midterm next week? Like, just don't worry about it. Go focus on botany. And then I had another student who came up and said the same thing, is in the same botany class. And my goal is that they understand botany and they understand my class as well. So that's not coddling, that's teaching them that what's important is their understanding of the subject, and also their mental health, their feeling of safety in a classroom. So I think coddling would be assuming that they can't do the work on their own, whereas what I'm doing is trying to give them the space to do the work within the context of their life, if that makes sense. So I want them to be able to do the work and understand it within all the other things that they're expected to have to do, as opposed to assuming you can't do this, so I'm going to make it so easy for you that basically you're not going to do it at all, but you're still going to get a passing grade. That's not doing them any favors. It's not preparing them for the next step, which is part of my goal, is that they go to wherever they get into and want to go to, and they don't get there and they're lost. I wasn't lost after I transferred from City College, and I don't want them to be lost either. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the line, is remembering what is the goal here, and how do I work that goal into real life scenarios.
So we're just overcoming the pandemic years and COVID and online learning. So obviously this question will be seen through that lens, but how are students different today versus 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or when you first started teaching? I in my field, I notice incredible amount of difference. I'm constantly having to teach against social media and TikTok and these other platforms where it's entertainment, and I'm constantly trying to expand people's attention spans and trying to say, hey, we have to be comfortable being bored. We have to be comfortable feeling as though nothing's going on right now, because in those moments we're forced to think and be creative. And I don't know about you, I have a sense, but growing up, I spent a lot of time alone. I think you did too. And when you are in those positions, what do? You think, you plan, you envision, you set goals, you plot your world takeover, you think about you, okay? And then with TikTok and social media, what are you doing? You're looking at other people doing things. And that's a new thing. New in this last 5 years. It's like, I genuinely believe that you cannot be creative if you're constantly watching other people being creative. That you have to be creative in the context of you brainstorming and figuring things out on your own. Of course, we can be inspired by other people, but if you're constantly just admiring the work and not thinking about it. And so the way that translates into journalism is, a lot of students, they just want to analyze the work. They just want to talk about the story and, oh, that's biased, or that's not biased, or that bad, or that's such a good topic, or there's no representation there. Where's the diversity? Or there's good diversity. And they come in and they think that they're just going to be able to levy their opinions on everything. And that's journalism. And they said, yes, journalists have opinions, but before we get there, we have to do the work. So we understand that it's really hard to be a journalist. And the first thing you write, I guarantee you, I don't care how woke progressive you are, I don't care what you are, the first thing you're going to write, somebody's going to have a problem with it. And you're going to be like, wait a minute, I didn't mean to do that. And so I'm trying to get them to understand that you have to create and do in order to understand what it feels like before you start levying these criticisms that are just like, okay, we can all criticize everything all the time, but that's not creative. Creative is doing something and putting yourself out there. And so that's a challenge for me. And attention spans, I mean, people only read headlines. We see that on Facebook. Like, I mean, I write stories every day, and the company I work for will put them on social media, and then I'll like look at them and like, what about this? And what about this? Like, if you actually clicked on the story, you would know, but you're actually making judgments based off the headline. And so what I've noticed with is the iPhone and the apps have really shortened students' attention spans. And whenever I talk to them like that, initially they come from me from their generational fault line of like, well, you're just older, you just don't get it. I'm like, well, I have a phone too. Like, I mean, you know, I'm on Instagram too. Like, it's not like don't know what Snapchat is. Like, I get it, but
Right.
at the same time, it's about understanding how much time you're going to spend there and how much time you're going to spend. If you experience life as opposed to observing life, you're going to be much more richer emotionally and intellectually. And then by the end of the semester, by mid-semester, they kind of all understand it and get it and that sort of thing. But I'm also not like one of these teachers who's like, never do that on social media. I understand they're going to do it, but it's about appreciating both things. So that's one of the challenges I see, in terms of now versus when I started, certainly in 2009 and even just five years ago. What about you?
Yeah. Well, so different subject, right? So if you're teaching journalism, it's social media is going to be sort of a different challenge for you in that, like you said, in order to be a journalist, they need to go deep into something and really understand it. And even in a long article, you're still only writing, a fraction of what you actually know about this subject. And then if you break that down even further into a headline or into a 30-second clip on social media, then you really lose the thought, the intention that has to go into truly understanding something. So for me, with social media in particular, what I see as a challenge is that students today coming in, graduating high school, coming into City College today, they've grown up and can't remember a time without an iPhone and can't remember a time that somebody wasn't constantly taking pictures of them, and that their parents most likely put them on social media growing up, and that they sort of like transferred into, okay, now I'm on social media, and what I've learned is that my life isn't so much about the intention and the sort of spaces in between. It's about packaging myself in a way and putting it out there for other people's consumption. I think that a really big challenge for our students today is understanding that their life is complex and it's not cut down to these pretty little packages that we place on social media. And I think it's challenging for them to understand that they're going to have bumps in the road and they're going to have moments where they don't understand things very well. And if they compare themselves to the kind of perfected life that they see of somebody that they're following on social media, they're going to feel inadequate and they're going to feel like they just can't do the things that they want to do. And so for me, the challenges that I see is that students kind of feel despair because they don't feel like they add up to, or are on par with some of the people that they follow, or their entire life is about capturing that moment and putting it on social media. So instead of living for that moment and really feeling it and understanding it, it's all just there as a way to put themselves out there and commodify themselves. They themselves become a commodity. For me, trying to teach them that the future survival of our species is based on a whole lot of working together, understanding each other. I mean, if we really want to look at the challenges that we have to look at today in the world, climate change, for example, then we need to be able to understand each other. And that comes from a lot more than just like a sound bite on social media, right? And that our survival as a species depends on us interacting with each other in a way that is much more than a surface level, pretty packaged, item basically for consumption. So for me, trying to get my students to pay attention, well, yeah, attention span is one thing. Getting them to do the material, like go through the material that they need to go through to really understand the subject is another thing. I make them watch I assign documentaries a whole lot because geography is a very visual subject, and documentaries are fantastic ways to get the visual elements, but also to get a whole lot of different researchers talking about a subject. They can see a diversity of thought process of people around the world talking about this subject, so that it's not just like me saying, well, this is important, like, oh, look, here's all these other people. But the documentaries need to be snappy. They need to be something that they're going to want. I mean, like, I'll hear students talk about a documentary like it was like they'll criticize it like I made them watch it because they're in film school. You're watching it because there's climate science in it. Pay attention to that, go into, like, allow this to be a deeper dive than going through a couple of memes on Instagram that say like like this is why climate change is whatever. So
Climate
yeah.
change is the most existential threat we're facing, as humans, like, wow, you're so profound. I didn't know that 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and understanding, fires are part of California's ecology. Yes. Drier years are going to mean more fuel for that fire. So then students like we learn to think on this very, very sort of closed loop, or there's not a whole lot of information that goes into that, but you need to analyze more, because a wetter year would then mean, and an earlier spring would then mean more growth, which could, even though it's a wetter year, mean more fires that year because you have more fuel to that fire, whatever. The point is that you need to think about things beyond like 2-3 easy steps. And so for me, the challenge, because I really do care about students understanding this subject, the challenge is getting them to pay attention long enough and getting them to see that it's not 3 steps. It's often a long process that they need to understand the beginning and end of in order for them to really understand the challenge of climate change, the challenge of social justice, the challenge of why Latin American economic, why the phases of Latin American economics are what they are, and that it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3. It's a much longer process than that, and understanding that would help them understand challenges in their future. So that's one big issue, is getting people to pay attention long enough to really understand the complexity of something, and also getting them to understand that their lives are not there for somebody else's consumption, and that they would not only live a happier life, but a more complete life if they remove themselves from that idea that I'm here for your consumption. That's one of the reasons, excuse me, I don't take pictures of students on field trips anymore. So I used to, so I go on field trips with students often. We do extra credit hikes. I did an extra credit hike last Saturday with a bunch of students. And 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have taken pictures of them, either on the hike and at the end. But now I don't do that anymore because they're so used to the idea, went on a hike, take a picture, post it. Went on a trip, take a picture, post it. And instead of thinking like, why are you on this hike? What is the actual goal here? What are we trying to do? So yeah, so there's a lot of challenges today with a cohort of students who have grown up with neatly pieced bites of life and have learned that they are there for consumption on social media, and getting them to understand, not just because they want to get an A in the class, but because I think the survival of our species depends on them understanding the complexity of the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a challenge. It's also a challenge coming out of the pandemic. I mean, geez, like what a big curveball thrown into our jobs as instructors. First moving along and then pandemic and everybody go home and figure out how to use Zoom and figure out how to use Canvas and figure out how to teach online right now and do it well, because you still need to make sure that a student completes the semester understanding the subject and et cetera, et cetera. And then stay online and package all your classes online and figure out how to be equitable online and figure out how to reach students online. And as students like fade more and more into the background, what I think students learned a lot during the pandemic is how to be passive in their learning. They kind of sit there and, they're consuming over Zoom. Getting them back into the classroom all last year, I just noticed the passivity of students, that I would ask them questions, I would try to get them involved, and just nothing. Like, and there's always quiet students in a classroom, but like last year, I mean, and the mask was part of it. I know that the mask had a important role in public health. That's not what I'm debating, but it was another way for them to kind of hide in the classroom and sort of reinforce this idea that they're passive learners rather than active learners. So that, plus I'm getting students now who spent like their last 2 years maybe in high school learning online, completely disengaged, and I'm grading them and I'm like, you gotta put information and you have to give me examples. You can't just say like, yeah, that happened, because like you can't just restate the question that I asked you and not give any information in it. And they're like, what, you're hard, why are you so mean? It's like, you need to learn how to critically analyze something. You can't just tell me like this very surface level of yeah, climate change is happening because temperatures are warmer and it will be very difficult for humans. Come on, like, give me some more information, give me an example. What do you mean? What kind of difficulty? And I get more, there's always pushback from students, but I get more pushback from students who are like, because they've been kind of what's the term, phoning it in. They've been sort of like phoning it in through the end of high school. And now, and this is nothing new, we get, I don't have a lot of faith in high school in general. I think that it teaches students to be cynical and doesn't teach them how to critically analyze, and teaches them to not trust their teachers. And then they come to City College and we have to like scrape all that away and teach them to trust us again, teach them to, instead of being cynical, analyze. And yeah, so that's always been a problem with high school, like people coming out of high school. But now it's like, not only are they cynical, not only do they not trust us, but they're completely passive in their education. And I'm trying to get them back in here, excited again, understanding again. And yeah, so it's challenging. And it was, and teaching with that mask on, man, I did not sign up for being a teacher in that way. I mean, they couldn't hear me, they couldn't see my expressions. I have deadpan humor. that is how I discuss things like female genital mutilation in class. How am I going to discuss child soldiers and 6-year-olds getting married in the world and not have students walk out of class and want to just jump off the bridge, right? So I need to interject it with dry humor that doesn't make fun of those subjects, but allows for students to open up to them in a way where, again, they trust me, so they're willing to learn about it, and it doesn't completely just shut them down emotionally. In order for that to happen, you need to see my face expressions. You need to know that, if I make some comment that is sarcastic, if you can see this reaction versus this, and then they're just like writing it down,
yeah,
writing down some joke I made about Florida or something. And I like, it does look like
a few things. Now you were outlining the steps, and now I have Alanis Morissette's 8 Easy Step songs in my head. If you haven't heard it, it's amazing, about self-deprecation. But now that's all I'm thinking about in the back. I gotta listen to the song when we are done. As we sort of wrap up here, I guess I wanted to sort of just kind of ask you a little bit about When you became a full-time teacher and you got hired, and we've talked a little bit about how you kind of made that happen through your perseverance, and that's the great thing about people like us is we never expect anything to be handed to us. We just work to make it happen until it happens. But what in terms of like you, like did anything, what changed for you when you were sort of like welcomed into the group and now you're gonna get paid for your entire day, not just 80 minutes a day,
We're going to assume that it was a welcome rather than like.
Okay, you force them to welcome you.
Yeah, it's kind of like the when I got engaged to my daughter's dad, it wasn't so much a "will you marry me" as well, I guess now we're gonna have to get married, sort of like that, versus welcoming versus like, well, now we got this. So the big difference, and I was made full-time like fall 2020, so in the freaking armpit of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It was, well, first of all, I made more money. I mean, that's a big thing. Like, yeah. Never underestimate that now, like that I was making a ton more money and had benefits and retirement and was on my way to possibly getting tenure and not getting fired from a job. For somebody who never expected to have a job ever, the prospect of not getting fired from your job, yeah, it makes a really big deal in how you feel about your kind of ability to spread your wings, for one. But I feel like, okay, so the benefits of being part-time, because I was part-time for a long time. First of all, I was lucky in that I never had too many challenges to my, like I wrote classes, I taught those classes, I generally got the schedule in the class, although I was very flexible. I've always taught at 8 a.m. I still teach at 8 a.m., which lots of people don't want to teach at 8 a.m. Mm-hmm. I would teach at night. Like I was always very flexible in what time slots, but I also was very lucky that, I was, my daughter was 5 months old when I started teaching, and I was able to commit a significant portion of time to being with her, as well as getting to do this thing that I loved. So I was very, very lucky. But you have no control over, while I did teach or write classes, you have no control over the direction that your program is going. Now, as a full-timer, I have a vision of what geography is going to be at the college, and that's going to be something that has an AA in GIS, which is a field of study that has real job growth and opportunity for students. I want that to be something that City College is known for, that not only can you get a 2-year education that leads to your four-year education, but you can also get certificates or associates in things that will get you a job and lift you up instead of being in a position of vulnerability and weakness. So I get to direct that. I get to direct that. I want us to have the best geography community college program in the state. And me being full-time, I get to kind of direct that to happen. Like I didn't have that as a part-timer. So, so the biggest difference is agency, I think. Agency over not just the classes that you teach, the times that you teach them, but also what do you want your subject to be? And again, I'm lucky because geography is small. If I were an English professor, I wouldn't have that same sort of ability to kind of like direct the boat and be like, I want English to be like this. I mean, there'd be a dozen other people who were like, sit down. So being full-time for me has given me a lot more agency in how to direct this program. And I want this program to be the best program there is when it comes to geography. So if it's not, then that's all my fault.
Okay, well, thank you, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
All right.